Over the past few weeks, we've been talking about the fivefold gifting of the Spirit as mentioned in Ephesians chapter 4. Those giftings that Paul lays out are apostle, prophet, evangelist, shepherd, and teacher. And the idea here that people have used in reading that text is that most of us have God-gifted one or two of these giftings and abilities. And so we've taken tests. You can see above you, if you look over your shoulder, people have put their name under the different of the giftings that they have upstairs in the gathering place. Last week, we talked about evangelist, and one of the things I've enjoyed doing is talking to someone who has that gifting in the church and hearing about how they use it. And so this week, I went and talked to a lady in our church named Heather Chestnut. And it was a great conversation because she scored high on evangelist, and her husband said, "Yeah, that's right, that's you." And she said, "Oh, no, anything but evangelist." And here's why she said that. She grew up in a pretty rigid fundamentalist household. And so evangelism to her, as she remembers it as a kid, is standing out on the street corner, giving people tracts, telling people really confrontational first words about how you're going to hell and you need Jesus to save you from that. And she just remembers that being uncomfortable and didn't want to do that. And so she's like, "Oh, goodness, no." And so she came to church last week really kind of nervous. She probably wanted to skip because she didn't want to hear about it or feel conviction or anything like that. And after the sermon was over, she looked over at her husband and he said, "Yeah, you understand now?" She goes, "Yes." But here's the thing. I asked her, "Well, what does it look like in your life? How do you use it?" And she told me the story about a person that she knows in her life outside of church who is an atheist, grew up in the church and has given up on all of it. She says, "We've been friends for 5 years, and for some reason she'll talk to me about what she's wrestling with spiritual life. She'll ask questions about why and how I still believe, and she's open to my answers. And we're constantly, every time we get together, we talk a little bit about spiritual things. And for some reason, she's open to listening to me." And so I see that now as evangelism, whereas I didn't necessarily think of it like that before. And then also, Pastor Jen, who's our youth pastor who's just up here, says that Heather works with junior high girls, particularly 6th grade girls. And what she does really well with 6th grade girls, and I know what you're thinking already. Thank God someone else signed up for 6th grade girls, right? And you might think, well, 6th grade girls' small group is for teachers or shepherds or something like that. But what Heather does really, really well with 6th grade girls is that she's always willing to start back at the basics. The 6th grade girls can ask the same questions over and over and over and forget what the answer was to the question they asked 5 minutes ago, let alone last week. And Heather is always willing to start back at the very basics. Jesus was the Son of God. Jesus died for your sins. Jesus wants to be in a relationship with you. And they all respond really well to her because she's always willing to be where they want to be and talk about what they're trying to wrap their head around and grasp for themselves. And so all of this comes together, and Heather realizes she is helping people understand the kingdom. She's reaching out to people who don't see themselves in, but giving them pathways towards Jesus. And this is coming alive in places both in her neighborhood, but then also at church. And it's really exciting to see how she's coming to see how God is and has made her an evangelist. And evangelism doesn't have to be scary. So this week, we're going to talk about shepherd. And as we talk about shepherd, I wanted to talk about shepherd in terms of one of my favorite things, which is sports. I love sports. In fact, when people ask me what my hobby is, I suppose the only answer is just sports. It doesn't even matter what sport. I like to watch sports. I like to play sports. I like to coach sports. I just love sports. And I spend almost every waking minute of my day, every free moment my brain has thinking about sports for some reason. And I grew up playing lots of different sports. I played tennis and baseball and basketball and soccer and football and just all of these things. And one of the major arguments that my mom and I had as a kid was whether or not I could play football. And she said, "You can't play football, it's too dangerous. It's dangerous on your brain, it's dangerous on your body, you could get hurt long term." And I would say to her, "That is nonsense." Turns out she was right this time. We didn't know everything we know now about concussions and all this. I thought, I have a helmet on. How could I possibly get hurt, right? So she wouldn't let me play football until high school. And I played on the high school team. And what I remember about practice is that practice was so boring. I hated football practice. Baseball practice, I was always moving, always at this station or that station. I was pitching, and then I was taking infield, then I was hitting. It was always moving and doing things. Always felt like I was actively trying to get better at the different crafts of the game. In football practice, I felt like I did this a lot. I would line up at like a line position. I'd get down, the coach would blow a whistle, and I'd do this. And that was it. And then I'd have to get back into the position again. The coach would blow the whistle, and then I would do this. And I'd just like over and over and over and over. And I'd just think, what am I doing? I know how to move to my left and hit the person there. Why are we doing this? And so every position group would break off and to go in their different places. The running backs would learn how to hold the ball. The quarterbacks would learn how their footwork worked. Offensive line would get up and they would hit. Then I would go to my defensive practice, and I played linebacker and defensive end there. And we would just shoot off the ball, stand up again. Or we would just one little motion, and we'd just do this over and over and over. And I think, this is so boring. When are we actually going to hit someone? When are we actually going to run a play? And then so we would do this all camp long, just these little things. And then it would get time to play for the games, and all of the groups would come together. And we would all do our one little motion that we'd practiced in isolation over and over and over, and suddenly it looked like a symphony. Everyone was coordinated to go to exactly the right spot. And suddenly, instead of just doing this, I was actually blocking someone so the running back could come around behind me. So the wide receivers could run a pattern and take defenders with them. And then all of a sudden, all of the one little motion that I had made sense in the context of the bigger scheme of things. And it became a beautiful symphony of activity. There's no real other sport that you coordinate individual activities into one cohesive whole. Because if you're supposed to go to the left and you go to the right instead, if you're just one person that goes to the right when you're supposed to go to the left in football, you run into someone else and you keep them from doing what they're doing, and the play is dead. All 11 players on the field need to be going exactly where they belong, or you have ruined the entire play. Recognizing that you need to get really strong at your role in football, and how sometimes that can feel boring, and it really doesn't become exciting until you see all 11 players working in unison with each other for the desired outcome of moving the ball down the field. And you get those rare opportunities to see how your little block or chip or out route or handoff works with everyone else. Football becomes beautiful when all 11 know their role and execute their role perfectly. I also, when I was younger, did a bit of acting and drama. And while being on the stage isn't exactly football, there's still this sort of reliance upon each other. If you are given a role and you are given a script, you had better memorize your script and your blocking. Because if the star finishes their line and turns to you, and you are not there to say your line, the next couple of minutes are going to be chaos. Because no one knows how to get to the next page of dialogue without the dialogue that's scheduled to be right there happening. You need to be in costume, in place, ready to go with your line at exactly your moment. I almost messed this up one time. And it was my fault, but it was only kind of my fault. You see, I was interning at a large church that did an annual passion play at Easter time. 5 nights the week before Easter, 1,500 at each show. We were expecting 7,500 people. And I was the intern at this church. My job was like hand out playbills or whatever at the door. Until 1 week before the first show, the guy with the second biggest part in the entire passion play was told by work that he had to leave and be on the other side of the country the week before Easter for his job. And they were in chaos. What in the world are we going to do? We're missing our role. This person has worked months on this role. They've memorized. They know what they're going to do. How are we going to do this? Well, the church responded the way every business in America responds. They made the intern do it. And so suddenly, with 1 week, I had to memorize the second biggest role in the entire Passion Play. I had to figure out costumes that fit. I had to figure out blocking. I had to figure out my lines. They gave me a CD of the whole thing, and every minute that I wasn't actively doing something, I was listening to the whole musical. I was just thankful that this part that I was given didn't involve singing any solos. Yeah, right? Well, they were pretty desperate. They might have made me sing. Who knows? But I didn't have to. And so I had to memorize this entire musical because I was in every stinking scene. And so I spent a week of every waking minute trying to memorize this whole thing. And I did pretty good, except my last 2 lines, I had trouble remembering them because they were paragraphs. And I started at the beginning. I memorized my first line, then I memorized my second line, and it started getting really close to opening night. And I had these 2 big paragraphs left to remember. And as it was getting to that night, I was realizing I was not going to get this perfectly. And so I worked with the person who had the biggest role as the second biggest role. And the 2 of us were soldiers who crucified Jesus. And the idea was supposed to be, there's the story in the gospel where the one soldier falls and says that surely this must be the Son of God. That was the biggest role. I was the unconvinced, unconverted, which is not exactly fun, but that's where it was. So these last scenes are like the climax. We are at the tomb of Jesus. Everything is rattling. Noise is coming up. There's smoke coming out. And I've got 2 big lines at the most important part of the story, and I cannot remember them for the life of me. So I told the star of the show, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to memorize the first line of my paragraph and the last line of my paragraph so that I can at least give you a cue so you can keep moving. And he agreed that was the best we had. I'd done pretty good to that point. And so every single night, I said the first line, I filled in some gibberish, and then I said my last line. Every single night, and we kept going. The last night, the tomb rattles and shakes. We fall down. I'm on the ground. 5 nights of doing this play. I am looking up at the top of the church, and it's almost my time, and I think to myself, I don't remember anything of my line whatsoever. And like, Jesus is now risen. I mean, this is a big, big moment. And so I just start talking. Just saying things about Jesus being risen. I don't remember what I said. I don't know if I ever got to my cue for him. I just stopped talking, hoped that he picked it up. And sure enough, he did. We made it and we survived. But you learn these things in life about how people are relying on you for your role, and that beauty and art comes together. Sport comes together when we will all buy into what our role is and execute our role. And so today we're talking about a shift in the roles. The first 3 weeks of APEST, we talked about what you might call pioneering gifts. People who are prophets, apostles, and evangelists go. They execute themselves outside of the church. They're breaking new ground for the gospel. They're starting ministries. They're reaching out to people. They're really externally focused in the way they want to execute their call in God in their life. And this week and next week, we're talking about shepherd and teacher, which are very, very common gifts within the church, but they operate differently. They may not, if you are a shepherd or teacher or both, you may not be very comfortable being forward-facing, about being outside, about breaking new ground, but that's okay. Because what God has created in these giftings are settlers, people who calm the taken ground, who secure the land. When things are going and happening, they come alongside those movers and shakers, and they help build them up. They care for them. They make sure that when people go and bring people to the church, they bring them to a place of hospitality and kindness and calm and joy. Shepherds, who we're going to talk about today, are really cultivators of community that allow the church to be effective in terms of doing what it is meant to do. And you see, if we just had the first three, just apostles, prophets, and evangelists, the church would be chaos. Because the church is functionally a movement. It's a mission. It's a telling, a showing to the world what it is that Jesus can and is doing. And pioneers make messes. But developers, like shepherds and teachers, settle those messes. And they're almost like a choreographed football play. They bring unity to what seems like chaos and violence and people moving in all sorts of direction. And they're the ones who help make this all beautiful, so that it's not just people with helmets running into each other, but there's poetry happening. This is what shepherds do. And so in order to talk about shepherds, those who comfort, those who settle, I want to read some words from 1 Peter chapter 5. These are words where Peter is talking to people who are shepherds and elders within the church. And he gives them some tasks and some ideas and some imaginations for how they ought to think about themselves. And so I'm going to invite you, if you would, to stand with me as we read 1 Peter chapter 5, verses 1 through 11. To the elders among you, I appeal as a fellow elder and a witness of Christ's sufferings, who also will share in the glory to be revealed. Be shepherds of be shepherd of God's flock that is under your care, watching over them, not because you must, but because you are willing, as God wants you to be, not pursuing dishonest gain, but instead eager to serve, not lording it over those entrusted to you, but being examples to the flock. And when the chief shepherd appears, you will receive the crown of glory that will never fade away. In the same way, you who are younger, submit yourselves to your elders. All of you, clothe yourselves with humility towards one another, because God opposes the proud, but shows favor to the humble. Humble yourselves, therefore, under God's mighty hand, that he may lift you up in due time. Cast all your anxiety on him because he cares for you. Be alert and of sober mind. Your enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion looking for someone to devour. Resist him, standing firm in the faith, because you know that the family of believers throughout the world is undergoing the same kind of sufferings. And the God of grace, who called you to his eternal glory in Christ, after you have suffered a little while, will himself restore you and make you strong, firm, and steadfast. To him be the power forever and ever. Amen. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. You may be seated. In the first service, we were running about 10 minutes behind, so I was reading the scripture at 10 o'clock, or 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, yeah. So we're doing way better in this service. But I did get to tell them my favorite pastor maxim that pastors tell each other to remind them to not preach too long. So I'm going to tell you that just because it's fun. It goes like this. There's a very fine line between a long sermon and a hostage situation. So I was sweating a little bit at 10 o'clock because, I'm trying to wrap it up about then, and I was kind of just getting started. But we're in much better shape. So no, I won't talk more. I'm just kidding. Take my watch off. It's under the sleeve. No worries. I can't see it. So I want to talk about just a few things in this text to point out what I think is valuable and interesting and helpful to us. First of all, Peter is talking to people with the shepherd gifting, with the shepherd role within the church. And he calls them co-elders or co-pastors. And I find that so encouraging. If you have a shepherding gift or a shepherding call in your life, Peter himself, the very one who followed Jesus on the dusty streets of Galilee, who was given the keys to the church and was told that he was the rock on which the church would be built, Peter himself is looking at people with similar giftings to him and saying, we're in this together. You have the same call, the same goal, the same function within the church that I do. He's not saying, I'm the one who's teaching you how to do this. He's saying, we are in this together. Peter himself is sharing this gift of shepherding the church. He reminds them as well that they're shepherding God's flock, that these are God's people, not their people. And And anytime the Bible talks about sheep or shepherds or flock, it is humbling, I think, because sheep are kind of dumb animals. And so I'm not always real happy that I'm compared to sheep in the whole idea of the New Testament idea of the church. Sheep are kind of dirty and smelly, and they don't know where they're going, and they don't know what they're doing. However, we're called to take care of that. So if you are around people in the church and you think to themselves, well, they really don't know what they're doing. That's true. You're not called to insult them. You're not called to beat them. You're not called to shake them up until they get it right. You're called to care for them in that state of struggle, in that state of lostness. See the brokenness around you and don't judge it, but help it. Care for it. This is what shepherds do. Shepherds don't get the job of shepherd, then go out to the field and say, what a bunch of idiot sheep. Why are we even bothering with this, and go home? They see the helplessness of sheep, and they don't judge against them. They protect them because of their helplessness. They see the struggle that people are having, and they show up to protect and help and guide them precisely because they're unable to do it on themselves. They don't judge them as bad. They judge them as needing help, and they show up over and over and over. Which then leads Peter to say to us, we have got to have a willingness for the sake of others and not for personal gain. The idea of being a shepherd isn't about saying, look at all the people who follow me. It's about showing up and risking yourself for the sake of people. It's not about your own titles and gains when you're a shepherd. It's about the others who need a shepherd. And Peter reminds us that Jesus himself is the chief shepherd. So we're to emulate Jesus. We need to look and see how Jesus cared for people, how Jesus showed up, how Jesus led, how Jesus cultivated, how Jesus called. We need to see when Jesus has grace and when Jesus is tough. We need to see who Jesus is tough on and who Jesus seems soft on. And our shepherding of other people needs to emulate the very, very personality and calling and life of Jesus. He is the great shepherd. We have a very, very clear guide in which we are to emulate in our shepherding life. And then Peter calls us in this task of shepherding to be submissive and humble. Of all things, shepherds are usually really good about caring for people, but you can get to the point that the title, the job, having people underneath you can start making your head big. We are called to be submissive and humble when we are pastoring, when we are shepherding people. And it's very, very important that we do that. And then we're told here to cast all of our anxiety on Jesus, which I think is an incredible reminder, because in counseling language and in seminary and pastoral training, one of the things that's hammered into you over and over and over when you are going to be caring for people's lives and souls and personal details is that you have to be a non-anxious presence. That's the language that's used, be a non-anxious presence. And the reason is because when you are a shepherd, you will end up in very anxious places, places where kids are in trouble, where there's financial struggles in people's lives, where people have made colossally big mistakes and have ended up in the consequences of those. You will end up, when you are a shepherd caring for people, in people's messes. And if you come into those spaces with your own anxiety, you're just going to ratchet up the temperature to unhealthy levels. If you're going to be a shepherd helping people in their difficult situations, in the messiness of life, you have to be non-anxious so that you're the one who's bringing the temperature down in difficult circumstances. And so the remedy that Peter has here is do your work before you show up in people's lives. Come to Jesus and learn that He can take your anxiety off of you. You don't have to be anxious all the time. You'll make other people anxious when you're anxious. Anxiety is contagious. But what we're invited to do when we're shepherds is to spend time with Jesus, getting to know His heart, His rhythms, His view of the world, because it can lower our own temperature in our lives, which means when we show up with other people, we're ready to bring the temperature down instead of bringing the temperature up. I don't know about you, but I get scandalized anytime I read Jesus say, do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow has enough trouble of its own. Because my immediate response to that is, Jesus, I'm already worried about August. What do you mean tomorrow? Right? Anxiety is so easy to enter into. Worrying about the future, worrying about the way things are going to be is so easy to slip into that. And here Peter is saying, if you're going to be a shepherd, cast all of your anxiety on Jesus because he cares for you. He will take it. He will help you. And then as you do your work to spend time with Jesus and get to know his heart that invites us to not worry, we can then show up to be helpful to people, to actually bring their temperature down. And then finally, Peter says, the devil prowls around. And I think that's easy for us to understand. I think we understand that very much. We look around the world and we see messes and chaos. We see it easy for people to trip and slip up. We see a world in which evil seems to reign and rule. Evil so often feels like it's winning in our world. But we need to remember that evil has already lost. Evil is not winning, it will not win. Evil, the devil, is a lot like a chicken on the farm that has its head cut off. It is very unsettling to see a headless chicken running around still. If you've ever seen it, it is disturbing. But the chicken is dead when its head is cut off. The devil and evil is just the same. It may seem scary, it may seem odd, it may be running around in our world, but Jesus has defeated evil on the cross. It has lost. It just runs around wild and uncontrolled on its last legs. We need not be afraid, but we need to be prepared. And shepherds, in particular, exist to help comfort people, to care for people, when evil, the chicken with its head cut off, shows up on our street in our neighborhood. Evil will make its way to you. It will seduce you. It'll hurt you. It'll break you. Shepherds come to help deal with the carnage, to help calm, to help heal, to help make new, to help find forgiveness, to help find restoration, to find a pathway over and across anything that the devil's scheme might bring. A shepherd is a protector. Whether it's evil or chaos or anxiety that comes, a shepherd shows up to protect and settle and help. And I think all of this from 1 Peter is really good because we should be reminded that the church is a sent body functionally first and foremost. We have gotten in the habit in the Western world 2,000 years after Jesus to think that the church is a building with a street address. And church is where I go on Sunday morning. But the original New Testament concept had no idea about this. And even the Greek word itself for church is ekklesia, which basically just means called out ones. And ekklesia might have been used in your average Greek town or Roman town in this world, where people would be called out of their normal everyday life into an assembly. It might have been a decision-making body. It could have been a political body. They're called out of their normal lives. They make decisions, they confer with one another, and then they're sent back to their normal lives. Ekklesia is the gathering of the ones who are called out. The church was never just an hour on Sunday morning in the New Testament. The church were the people called out of a chaotic world to gather, and then they were sent back into their lives. So we gather as the church, not as the end point. We gather specifically in order to scatter. The gathering that we're doing right now together is meant to strengthen the scattering. We are every bit the church when we're at work, at home, on the ball field with our kids, at school. We are the church there, every bit the same that we're the church when we're at this address under this roof. The gathering is to strengthen our scattering. And it's shepherds who have their moment in the gathering, because people re-emerge here beaten and bruised, tired and worn, because the world can be difficult. And shepherds build the church back up. They comfort, they help, they remind who and whose we are, so that when we leave again in just a few minutes, we feel strengthened by the ones who help us. The temptation that shepherds have in particular is that this is so comfortable inside of these walls, they want it to always be comfortable like this. And they don't free people to go again. They just want it to be comfortable all the time. That's the temptation that shepherds have. But a shepherd, when they're doing their best work, they gather people in, they make it a hospitable open space, they hear the stories of wounds and hurts and sadness and brokenness, and they build them back up to remind them that the God they meet in this place in worship will be with them in their meeting on Monday, at school on Thursday, at the fields on Friday, and on and on and on. Shepherds remind us and equip us that when we leave and go, we will be okay and God will go with us. And we find healing around them because they remind us of the character of who God is. Because we know that being scattered can leave anyone vulnerable. Being scattered is being alone, and it can be scary and it can be difficult. But the shepherds use this time of gathering to protect, to heal, to help, and to equip, so that everyone is at their absolute best when they are sent at the end of the service. So we're going to walk real quickly through the different archetypes, heroes, functions, all of this stuff about shepherds. These are to give you imaginations, ideas, senses of what shepherding could look like in our modern world. Archetypes and heroes of shepherds, these are ideas of what shepherds might look like or could function as. Caregiver, defender, peacemaker, helper, servant, selfless, healer, elders, guardians, humanizers, parents, first responders, counselors, cultivators, priests, and human resources. These are all ideas and images in our world that could help give us clarity from just the places that we go and the way we live of what a shepherd could look like. The functions of a shepherd are like this. They cultivate loving and caring community. They protect members. They maintain relational glue. They develop pathways towards maturity and discipleship. And you'll see next week when we talk about teachers, how they work in tandem with each other. The teachers help teach what maturity and discipleship look, but the shepherds give guidance. They create the path towards that. They work in tandem with each other. And shepherds create places of healing as well. Mature expressions of the church. Shepherds need the church to be this in its maturity. They need a church that's a human community that is reconciled, healed, and forgiven. And the church expresses itself in loving relationships. When the church is functioning in mature sort of ways, this helps shepherds because they can point all over the place to people who need healing and help to say, look, they're healed, they're helped. We're caring for each other. We're loving each other. This is what reconciled people look like. And they see mature versions of that all over. So when they're helping people become healed, they can point to the church and say, see how the church is helping people get healed. You can be healed too. The desired social impact that shepherds have. They long for a reconciled community, a loving human community. They want to see people reconciled across race, gender, age, and nationality. This is for everyone. And they want to see a communion in Christ as well. You may ask yourself, what are some potential ministries at Crossroads today? Well, one such thing is to be a small group leader, to huddle a group in your home or in your life where you work with them and you take care of them and you focus on them. You might want to be a discipleship leader in our Communities on Mission. Communities on Mission has one person who leads the mission, who reaches out, and often they're the ones taking new ground, but there's then also someone who works with them in leadership sharing, who helps disciple the people who are doing this ministry and mission as well, and focus on building people up, while we also focus on needs in our community. You might want to get involved with serving on the meal train, where we bring meals to families when someone has illness or a tragedy or a surgery and help them build back to full health. You might want to serve in Sea Kids or youth. And then finally, you might also want to get involved in our greeting ministry and Next Steps ministries, where we're trying to help people integrate into the life of the church. And a shepherding gifting is a great place, a first start with people to help them show how they can get involved. So again, I want to remind you that we made a shift in APEST this week. The first three that we talked about are all pioneering gifts. They're externally focused. They're going. They're moving and shaking. They're doing. They're starting things. And shepherd and teacher are so important because they help settle the ground. They eliminate the chaos. They bring hospitality and kindness and warmth to things that are getting going. They try to eliminate chaos and bring settledness. And shepherds are such vital, important parts of working all together within the church, that all of us have our role. And the role of the shepherd is to help bring community and safety and healing. And so finally, in my own words, when I think of a shepherd, what I think of is caring, nurturing, and helping. This is what I think of as a shepherd. And more than anything, that image, those words might help clarify to you what the work of a shepherd is and what a shepherd does. And so I thank God for shepherds. It's an incredibly important gift within the church. And if that's who you are, if that's how you came up, if that's how you emerged, I invite you, be aware, especially when you're at church, of people who are off, not quite right, who need a friend, who need someone to care and to listen. And to find yourself around, available, to help people find settledness, reconciliation with God, help and hope in their own life. We're going to sing a final song now. I invite you to join the worship team in singing as we worship, as we close this out today. Would you stand with me?